Hello, my name is Bruce Gilley. I'm Associate Professor of Political Science at Portland State University and the Faculty Advisor to our Political Science Honors Society chapter, New Pi. Today we'll be presenting a presentation on a task force on resilience and good governance that we completed during the winter 2014 semester here at Portland State. Our Political Science Honors Society is composed of 6 members and a team leader, and we've been working with the humanitarian organization Mercy Corps to help them investigate the relationships between resilience and good governance, particularly in Africa, but also in other developing countries. Today, each of the task force members is going to walk through their findings, and we'll be using the graphic behind me to illustrate some of the things that they talk about. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Rebecca Craven, a PhD student here at Portland State University and the team leader for the Policy Task Force. I primarily assisted with coordinating the team's activities and providing clarifying assistance as needed. The purpose of our work was to research and analyze the literature on good governance as it pertains to resilience, with a special emphasis on the Sahel region of Africa, and particular attention to Mali. To accomplish this, we worked from definitions of each of these terms, primarily based off of Mercy Corps' own, that are helpful to mention before the team members discuss their substantive research. We define resilience as the capacity of communities in complex socio-ecological systems to learn, cope, adapt, and transform in the face of shocks and stresses. Good governance, which is a key part of resilience, is a process of decision-making and implementation that is accountable, transparent, just, responsive, and participatory. In addition to these, the concept of social capital was an organizational foundation of our final products. We primarily referenced Daniel P. Aldrich and Robert Putnam on this concept and subsequently defined social capital as the trust, norms, and networks that facilitate action and that is coordinated among actors. 3 types of social capital will be mentioned by the students in their findings: bonding capital, or the relationships that exist within communities; bridging capital, or the capital that exists between communities; and linking capital, or the vertical relationships that exist between groups and higher authorities, primarily government institutions. While we focused on the applications of these concepts and ideas to the Sahel region of Africa, we believe our findings are also relevant for other areas with similar situational characteristics. States and regions that are developing, low income, and experience political transition, and that also experience environmental shocks and stresses may benefit from this research as well. To approach this task, we divided into 3 teams, each taking a different level of society. The national and regional level includes the highest formal and informal structures that are domestic, as well as inputs from international sources and relationships. The next level is the community level, which encompasses formal and informal structures of communities and local organizational groups. And the individual and household level looks at the micro units within communities and how they interact with good governance or build resiliency among themselves. We will now begin with a discussion of the substantive findings from the national and regional level, and using our graphic.
Hello, I'm Olivia Miller, and I was tasked with researching the relationship between resilience and good governance at the national and regional level. I found that national governance has the best impact on the areas of infrastructure and government institutions, rule of law, economic policy, and environmental policy. For the area of rule of law, in terms of Mali's central government structure, and its efforts to secure rule of law, conditions are characterized by political instability, corruption, and a weak judicial branch. While citizens are free from violent attacks at the polls or other threats, this does not promise that rule of law will follow easily. Human and social security plans should take priority over elections in order to improve governance. For my second area, infrastructure, I found that in order to establish a resilient system, not just at the state level, but with linkages to the community level as well, the Institutional Analysis and Development, or IAD framework, creates a complex set of rules that can help to organize and control institutions and infrastructure at any level. The set of rules for these institutions are represented in tiers. All of the tiers function in order to regulate the action arena, which involves the actions of individuals. These levels create redundancy within government institutions in order to make recovery easier if one level is destroyed or made useless by natural or man-made disaster, which you can see some of those up in that circle. These levels can be useful for government structure in a country like Mali because it can improve institutional and infrastructure organization if needed and help sustain it if it already exists. Using import trade as an example of an action arena in Mali, there have been complaints by foreign companies of illegal payments at the borders, and business and property rights are inconsistently enforced, which makes economic activity and development much more difficult. National efforts have been criticized as unhelpful or unable to protect those who are thought of as among the most vulnerable of Malians. An example of this is only 50 labor inspectors are available to inspect workplace violations such as exploitation of forced labor or child labor. Another example would be citizens living with AIDS and HIV cannot depend on law enforcement to shield against abuse in the society. For my third area, environmental policy, I found that the stress of climate change or disaster on Mali's government structure causes an added strain. Because of that added strain, the government needs to learn to cope with environmental disaster in a resilient way in order to have a positive environmental impact at the state level that will eventually link to the community. If the state can have a positive impact in a way that creates linkages between various levels of governance, they might be able to have a more effective environmental policy. In order for a state government to successfully save resources during comfortable climate times, it must communicate effectively and promote participatory planning and conservation. In order to develop a system that has sustainable natural resources through good and bad times, the national government must also involve and communicate with stakeholders and local government. If a party is interested enough, the state government may be able to convince the party to invest in order to receive some benefit from the work that is done. The risk to this is that if the state does not communicate with local governments and stakeholders efficiently, the stakeholders may withdraw and leave a project largely unfunded. If a project, for example, cross-border water distribution in South Africa, were to fail because of unreliable stakeholders, it would leave a government that cannot pay for resources that are needed during climate disasters such as drought. Using reliable stakeholders from sawmills and irrigation boards could lead to success that would allow for potable water distribution throughout more than just South Africa. This means that with the ability to create and save natural resources through the national level, the governance structure can mitigate many risks and be better prepared for crisis. The operationalization of conservation, sustainability, and mitigation of risks within the idea of widespread environmental impact is not always clear-cut, and certain parts may vary, such as which stakeholders to use or which local government agencies to communicate through, depending on the situation. But it is clear that resilience in environmental policy can depend on good governance at a national level. Communication and resource management can be used together to create resilience through a country from the top down. For my last area of focus, economic policy, I discovered that Mali is subject to shocks and stresses that can negatively affect the economic health of the country. The cotton and gold industries are the main areas of focus for the export economy, but these exports are placed under constant pressure by international pricing and supply demands. Good economic policy is needed to mitigate risks and recover quickly. Countries that are not economically resilient often suffer from too much dependency on needed imports, and export the majority of the goods made or grown in that area. This causes the country to be too vulnerable to changes in the global economy. For example, cotton farmers have been highly productive with their yields, but must compete with international pricing, which has been affected by larger, richer countries, especially those which are the largest cotton producers in the world. If a country is going to be economically resilient, it must be able to depend on appropriate government intervention to nurture economic resilience. The central government's role in a robust agricultural export sector includes its role in rebuilding and reorganization. Information is also a vital piece of a healthy economy, and the central government is in the ideal position to track and spread accurate and reliable information about international market prices, which could negatively impact farmers. Providing such information freely to stakeholders would allow farmers to make more informed decisions about how to proceed with their inputs and crop yields. A cluster of informed manufacturers, such as a price clearinghouse, could construct a process which would help make up for lowered prices and allow farmers to have reasonable returns to continue investing in inputs. Hopefully, a positive feedback loop would result from well-timed, relevant, and reliable information that actors in the economy find helpful while making decisions. There are many obstacles to creating good economic policy. For example, economic integration must contend with national misgovernance, multiple languages, state protocol, and issues such as border controls and fee negotiations. The resulting problem creates a built-in disadvantage that policymakers must confront in order to craft useful ways to address cycles of drought and food shortage. Good governance is possible at the national level and can help to improve resilience of a country and the welfare of its citizens, but only by communicating and working with the community and individual level while building links of social capital. Without that communication, it will not matter what aspect of the country the government is focusing on, whether it be rule of law, infrastructure, economics, or natural resources. It will not be as resilient without the communication between all levels. The areas of rule of law, infrastructure, environmental policy, and economic policy can have widespread impact if they are resilient through good governance at the national level. And they can create and establish a background for the relationship between resilience and good governance and set the stage for policies to be operationalized at the community level. Thank you.
My name is Nikki Betty, and I work with the Pioneer Chapter Pi Sigma Alpha on the Resilience and Good Governance Policy Task Force. My main role in the task force was to delineate the understanding of resilience and good governance at the informal community level. Social capital was found to be key in helping communities be resilient in the face of shocks and stresses. In the next following 5 minutes, I'm going to be addressing 1, how bonding, social capital, and collective action help communities in times of crisis be resilient, how social capital contributes to good governance principles, and how bonding social capital can be built and generated. Turning to the first topic, how bonding social capital and collective action may help communities be resilient in times of crisis, and how specific groups within the community, such as women, may be helped through bonding social capital. The first case study looked at villages near Lake Kyoga and Lake Wamala in Uganda and their adaptive response to flooding and drought. Through the bonding social capital and social networks that villagers had built up before the crisis and the drought and flooding had occurred, during the crisis and during the flooding, villagers were able to seek help from others, such as their neighbors and other members of the community, to borrow food and money to help them. Second, local council committees advocated on behalf of the victims of the floods to the landlords for access to land to rebuild their homes. The second case study, which examined women in particular and their adaptive response to disaster, looked at the response that occurred after Turkey, after a major earthquake occurred. Women in particular are significantly vulnerable to disasters in the sense that there are more deaths of women during disasters, and there's a limited access of women and women-headed households to formal relief and recovery mechanisms. So in this sense, the social networks that were found in Turkey helped the women in particular a lot. First, through helping them, it helped them overcome the stigma of receiving public assistance after the earthquake occurred. Second, it helped them receive positive psychological support and rehabilitation after the trauma of the earthquake. Third, it empowered them to gain a civic consciousness in the public sphere, and it helped them better express themselves at home through the support that they received in the networks. The fourth was that it helped them overcome some of their stigma in receiving public assistance. Turning to the second topic, how social capital contributes to good governance principles. There were several case studies which examined collective social networks and groups which help both in resource management and increasing participation and equity among the communities. These case studies looked at several collective managed groups in India. They found that first, private ownership of water resources versus collective ownership resulted more in resource degradation, and this had a negative impact on the environmental capital of the community. Collective ownership also increased yield and improved biodiversity and improved income among households. Second, these collective management groups helped increase local participation, and they improved the equity of the distribution of resources to various members of the community, and they also improved cooperation between the various ethnic groups. Such collective social network groups were groups that revolved around water management resources in particular, such as irrigation and watershed management, and there was also different farmers research groups. Turning to the third topic, how specifically bonding capital can be built and generated. One case example looks at the agriculture sector, and the second example looked at women in Turkey. First, one specific aspect of bonding capital trust can be built up through 4 different mechanisms, as one study found. The first mechanism is establishing networks of working relationships, such as trade partnerships. This can occur when payments are made in time between the buyer and the trader, and when the buyer continues buying from the farmer in times of scarcity. The second mechanism is building informal customer relationships. and this can include in-home stays during travel of the farmer or the farmer's children during their education in the same city, for instance, or gift giving, or naming of the children after the trader, or having the trader attend important ceremonies of the farmer's family, or even contributing money, and additionally visiting the farmer when he or she is sick. The third mechanism found was forming links on pre-existing networks also helped. The fourth mechanism found that establishing an intermediary common to both parties increased trust between both members. Such intermediaries can include a guarantor in case the debt defaults, or elders in the family, or another farmer who's a close customer of the trader. A second study highlighted ways to build social capital in the general community, and this can include women especially. The first way was increasing face-to-face interaction to increase trust and reciprocity. This can be done in two ways. For after disasters, ensuring proximity among disaster survivors to ensure that they stay in their own community following a disaster versus dispersing. This can be done through having groups that are built after a disaster occurs so that there's social support. The second way occurs before a disaster may strike, and that is through building public spaces such as parks and plazas, and this would increase face-to-face interaction among the community in general. The second way that was found to help build social capital in the general community was to have leaders be there to mobilize the potential for community action in case of a crisis. And this can be done through having leadership building programs. The third way was enabling institutions which would ensure civic participation and social inclusiveness in the community. In conclusion, it's found that social networks made up of trust and reciprocity helped members both before and during or after a crisis, and they also helped enable collective action to help support the communities recover and transform after a disaster.
Hello, my name is Ukiah Hawkins, and I am a member of the New Pi chapter here at Portland State University, currently a senior at PSU. The goals of my research within the context of this effort were to create a better understanding of good governance within the study group as a whole, utilizing Mercy Corps standards and focusing on participation. Another goal was to research and operationalize bridging social capital and to analyze functional case studies which will allow for further comparative study of the interaction between community-level bridging social capital, citizen participation, and the overarching goal of resiliency in the field of international relief and development aid. My findings include the need for greater awareness and education to the public of potential stressors and the role of community members in the building of capacity toward a solution, and the integration of and into these societies of brokers as a means of bridges for communicating the needs of the informal public sector, one hierarchy to the next within, as well as to the more formal levers of power. Those two things are known as bonding social capital and linking social capital. But I'm here today to talk partly about bridging social capital. Bridging social capital, according to Daniel P. Aldrich, has been found to be a valuable measurement analytic in the building of community trust and cooperation in the face of disasters, both catastrophic and protracted. In order to best evaluate capacities of resiliencies in states and communities which are seeking to achieve this resiliency, these capacity models need to be tied to understandings of social capital as a whole. Mercy Corps recognizes that one of the most valuable tools in the provision of good governance is that of participation in civic affairs of discussion and government by those directly impacted by the decisions occurring therein. Equity of involvement in issues of governance by those of various gender, ethnic, and socioeconomic backgrounds is considered vital to the furtherance of resiliency, as is identified by Martin Robards and Lillian Alessa in their 2004 work, Timescapes of Community Resilience and Vulnerability in the Circumpolar North. In another study in the state of Washington here in the United States, the increase of systemic environmental awareness of those directly impacted by the shifting systemic adaptivity showed an increase in civic literacy, and thereby a greater emphasis towards control by those populations without a voice. That was recognized in a 2010 study by Heidi Ballard and Jill Belsky. Once again, the value of the bridging effect of social capital between disparate social hierarchies is necessary to understand the role of the community within a discussion of resiliency. In Cambodia in 2002, they held a series of community council elections. Cambodia is a nation state which is not particularly known for a history of participatory governance. This 2002 occurrence utilized principles of decentralization of power, capacity building of local people, the awareness of the potential for participation by those citizens, and the enhancing of prospects of both socioeconomic and environmental sustainability. While direct electoral involvement shown by percentages of those local citizens wasn't necessarily improved, their awareness of the practical function of those representative councils was, as is shown by Pellini and Ayers in a 2007 work, Community Participation in Local Governance in Cambodia, Learning from the Village Network's Approach. If sustainability can be affected and enhanced by the ability of individuals within communities to participate, whether in a direct or indirect fashion, then the value of participation as an element of good governance through the creation of bridging social capital and within the more broad discussion of resiliency can be seen. Other studies point to the value of brokers of power as agents of the creation of bridging capital within formal institutions. Informal power relationships can become established between those holding direct coercive authority, in this case the councils, and those citizens whom they serve. In these situations, it is important to recognize the value of the power brokers and the role they play in governance. This was shown in 1988 by Larissa Adler-Lomnitz in her work, Informal Exchange Networks in Formal Systems, a Theoretical Model. The effect that these brokers play can be positive or negative within the context of the bonds of their communities. The role of the broker can also be played by a spiritual advisor, as is identified by Kashif Sheikh in a 2006 work involving religious leaders in conservation education in the Western Karakoram of Pakistan. The literature displays that the importance of recognizing the role of spiritual and economic power brokers and their effect upon interactions within community cannot be underestimated in the dealings of governance. Finally, one of the most complicated issues to overcome in areas wherein participation is meaning to be increased is the difficulty in overcoming barriers predicated upon diverse social norms and identities. These barriers have been shown to have the potential to be overcome through various informal processes, as long as the opposition to the community comes from a source that threatens the well-being of groups across classical boundaries and has been identified in these protracted crises as are inherent to the Sahel region of Western Africa. In summation, the literature available displays that barriers to governance can be overcome in a concerted effort to contextually educate the people about those issues which cause potential harms to economy and well-being, involving them in a process which provides for increased participation of communities of all backgrounds while utilizing the evaluative tool of bridging capital. Next up is Madeline Bishop, and she will be speaking of the importance of linking social capital in these networks.
Hello, my name is Madeline Bishop, and I am a member of the Pi Sigma Alpha Taskforce at Portland State University. I was tasked with specifically focusing on the formal institutions within the community level and the responsibility of these formal institutions of public service delivery. Today I'll be going over 3 key points, one of which is the role of local governments within good governance. 2 will be the importance of linking social capital for local governments, and 3 will be the necessity of modular structures. To begin, the literature reveals that a core piece of policy implementation for both good governance and resilience is local level institutions. It's the government portion of good governance. According to the Good Governance Framework of Mercy Corps, formal governments can be largely held responsible for effective, responsive, and efficient public service delivery. Defined by Andrew Zolli in the book Resilience, one of the key factors of efficient public service delivery is feedback mechanisms and communication between informal networks and government institutions. Feedback mechanisms can be defined as the sorting through and sifting of data from many networks. Applied, this means that there's open communication between formal institutions and their community counterparts. Zolli argues that feedback mechanisms are necessary for a whole system to function resiliently so that they might build trust so that the health of each network can be kept in check. In the book Building Resilience, Daniel Aldridge stresses that these government capacities are necessary to create social capital between communities and linking them to outside networks. An effective local government can serve to help build these networks through upward development, creating strong transformative capacity through linking capital to the national government, and build adaptive capacity through bridging capital to other communities so that they might strengthen their public service delivery. Within the community level, this is key as this is where national policy becomes action. Next, we will look at the importance of social capital for effective public service delivery. The literature states that local institutions are more effective at building capacity to help increase with disaster preparedness when they utilize social capital. Adam Byron Sigmiller provides an example of this in Macedonia when a city faced threats of earthquakes and they hoped to increase their resilience to this threat. To develop a resilient strategy, the government tried to first isolate the risk factors. They found that even if buildings were reinforced or evacuation plans were in place, when feelings of distrust in a government increased, the plans would not be effective with their citizens. It was found that overall social capital, bolstered through programming to increase communication and outreach, was more important than the physical regulations such as law enforcement. This example demonstrates that strong relationships between the formal institutions and the informal community is necessary, and linking social capital to share this information with the national government is a necessary step for disaster preparedness and service in the face of disaster. The relationship between formal institutions to individual community members illustrates the importance of trust between local institutions and individuals will impact the effectiveness of any resilience programming. Being able to identify the health of these individual linkages between the communities to their institutions during policy implementation and then up to the national government is essential to evaluate the functionality of any resilient system, demonstrating the importance of good governance. Finally, we'll look at the importance of modular structures within local governments. The relationship between regional and community governments should be carefully managed to ensure that policies developed on the national side are supported during implementation time, which requires linking capital between communities to their national government. A case study of this in Sri Lanka through the International Federation of the Red Cross showed the necessity of modular structures. A national network of offices was created in response to the tsunamis in 2005 to try and prepare for future disasters. A National Disaster Management Center was established in the capital, and from that, there were different disaster management coordination units created within each district. From these district management offices, there were disaster management committees created within each village, and the local village leaders were trained on how to respond during disasters. This demonstrates the importance of resilience, of systems within resilience theory and modular structures to develop community-level institutions which can effectively and positively respond during disasters to connect federal policies to individuals. Modular structures within policy implementation allow for clear definition of roles of institutions and the ability to replace and rework portions of the institutions when necessary. As we have seen, the establishment of local institutions can be key to unite national policies to those informal networks. It shows the importance of systems within resilience. The national policies are implemented on a local level, affecting both the formal institutions and informal networks. Working within these systems are the individuals to make the system whole. We now look towards the key factors in creating individual resilience.
Hi, my name is Angela Rico, and you have thus far learned about linking good governance and resilience at the national and community level. Rodrigo and I have focused on the individual and household level. Our case studies have been countries with climate stresses, low development, and transitional governments, such as Mali, Guinea, Burkina Faso, Colombia, and Niger. Gender, community organization, and community building through dialogue forums are key concepts that have stood out from the literature on this subject. Jen Senzimir notes that good governance and resilience go hand in hand. You cannot have resilience unless resilience measures, unless you also have structures of good governance. Resilience and resilience building are among the main objectives that relief and humanitarian organizations are trying to accomplish in developing countries. Timothy Frankenberger writes that simply being able to make a resilience bounce back from a crisis is not enough. Developing countries that have endured crises must have resilience programming that enables them to not only recover from crises, but also avoid crises altogether, as well as improve their national well-being and bring themselves out of poverty. Now, I would like to discuss gender and economic empowerment. As I mentioned, gender and more specifically women empowerment have stood out as key strategies for linking good governance and resilience. Mercy Corps, in the resilience strategy for the Sahel, believe that women through the Sahel region lack decision-making power concerning household livelihood strategies, power over productive resources, control over use of income, leadership opportunities within their communities, and control over their own reproductive health decisions, including birth spacing and family planning, issues that hinder the ability of resilience. A good governance framework that incorporates programs such as school-based meal programs and women-led village savings and loan associations will translate into women empowerment and will create greater livelihood diversification and climate adaptation. John D. and Brooke House conducted six single-gender participatory workshops using PRA into communities in northern Mali. They discovered that often women have a long-term perspective focused on educational investments and non-economic-based strategies. Therefore, as education is available to women and their children, the likelihood of resilience based on different means of livelihood after climate stress, such as drought, is higher. John D. and Brooke House also explained the different livelihood types and activities before and after drought have dramatically changed at least 10 years. These changing livelihoods have shifted from water-based to forest and livestock-based activities, and those shifts have affected women in their social roles and daily life. John D. and Brooke House argue that increased daily vulnerability of women due to restricted availability and greater health risk is in fact happening. Similarly, the re-established local associations that lead to participatory and community rebuilding in areas like Gao and Timbuktu have helped increase income generating and market gardening activities. Mercy Corps believes it's critical to promote the inclusivity of women, among others, in their principles guiding resilience enhancement. They say by creating greater opportunity for their involvement in key institutions and decision-making processes, Mercy Corps hopes to empower women. As noted by John D. and Brooke House, Gender relations are in flux due to the forced migration of men and the emergence of new roles and responsibilities for women. Thus, the question of whether this opportunity gap results in women empowerment would depend on the facilitation of local and national governments to create policies such as access to basic services and productive assets that enhance and empower women. Our diagram attempts to characterize the cycle by demonstrating that access to the market will lead to women being able to sell goods, which at the same time results in income and resource sharing. Now, Rodrigo will explain how community organization and community building through dialogue play a role in linking good governance and resilience at the individual and household level.
Hi, I'm Rodrigo, and I work with Angela as part of the individual and household level resilience and good governance lit review. As Angela explained, women play a very important role in resilience. We will now examine another aspect of women empowerment through community organization. The community organization of gender plays a large role in creating resilience at the household, individual, and even community level. This means that women need to be able to build up their own social capital, which in turn builds up their personal resilience. Jules Preddy and Hugh Ward define social capital as comprising relations of trust, reciprocity, common rules, norms and sanctions, and connectedness in institutions. One way of building up a woman's social capital is by her utilizing her already present bodily capital. Susan Murray, in her long-term case study of a group of women in Burkina Faso, defines bodily capital as a woman's physical attractiveness, strength, and fertility, and the subsequent uses of that bodily capital to overcome certain shocks and stressors. These women would be married for the sole purpose of getting pregnant and giving birth to many children, while also carrying out the many domestic activities reserved for wives. These many and laborious activities expected of women caused them to have extreme levels of stress, which could at times interfere with their pregnancies. Murray notes that women who became fed up with their husbands, co-wives, or in-laws would then leave their homes and return to live with their parents. Women in Burkina Faso built up their personal bodily capital by reclaiming some agency over their own lives. With the building up of bodily capital, women in Burkina Faso were better able to exploit social capital in order to make them more resilient to any problems they may face. This resulted in these women also increasing their personal resilience, because when they are under stress, they have a way to escape and recover from said stressors through demanding that certain concessions be made to make their lives more tolerable and stress-free. Timothy Frankenberger writes that women in many developing nations experience endemic gender inequality in decision-making over productive resources, control over household income, and leadership roles in their communities. Women can play a very important role in building up of resilience at the individual household level and even at the community level. To do so, Frankenberger writes that women's access to productive assets and strengthening their decision-making in both community and household affairs needs to be fully realized. As stated earlier, women need to be given leadership roles in community savings and loan programs and in the education of their children to become capable of supporting themselves without being dependent on the surrounding natural resources, which can be susceptible to many different shocks and stressors. Another key element to building good governance and the resulting resilience of a community is to have rich intra- and intercommunal relationships. Community dialogue forums, as illustrated by this center panel, community dialogue forums have proven to be a place where this type of communal relationship can be fostered because they encourage citizen engagement and participation while also resolving local disputes nonviolently. An example of these communal forums are the peace communities, and have proven to be rather effective in the region around the Carari River in Colombia. The local population in this region set up forums to foster a dialogue in order to make sure that non-combatants caught between the various warring factions would remain unharmed and maintain their non-combatant status. Oliver Kaplan writes that in communities that did not have these dialogue forums, they had miscommunication or no communication that led to suspicion and mistaken actions taken against civilians. Similarly, we find in Mali another form of community dialogue, a group of individuals who have an equally important role in resilience building. The Smithsonian Institution has a video that explains the roles of traditional Malian storytellers called griot in French or Jeli in Malian, in which these traditional storytellers help resolve disputes, local disputes, non-violently.
Let's check it out.
To my immediate left, you have Mr. Kone Mokhtar, and next to him, Diabate Mamari. He's also a Ngoni player. Both of them are from the country of Mali, as you know, and they are professional storytellers, genealogists, and oral historians. Now, well, I just saw this very beautiful princess, and if you're truly a lord, you have to find a way to marry her. Otherwise, your leadership doesn't mean anything, and you're sort of a loser king. In the king's court, in the Traore side, there was a woman who got lots of wisdom, who did say that there was no need, every time you talk of a love issue, to come up with a conflict situation. That there is a need to ask the princess, and if she does accept to marry this lord, then they should go ahead and do that.
So basically, what are griots? How do they, what is their role in the community?
He explained that this goes way back, that every society tried to create a collective history, a collective memory, and some people must specialize in this. Just like here, you would have historians who would write, who would comment, who would research in order to keep the past. If they cannot write, then they train themselves from generations to generations, pass along the history, and make sure that their descendants, their children, become the oral historians. Plus the record keeping orally, they also learn the skills to be good communicators and then be in charge of the social major events. There is two families fighting, somebody needs to mediate and bring the peace. So you need very skillful communicators to make sure that every major step in somebody's life or in the group life is well taken care of and remembered of. So that makes you a Jeli.
We found that these traditional storytellers, the griot, provide a forum for dialogue which has unique aspects. They use a comical tone to dispute mediation where they ease tension and discuss difficult topics through a method called laughing cousins. Laughing cousins are a way to mediate interpersonal disputes while also trying to avoid offending either party to the dispute, thus allowing the parties, and particularly the offending party, to save face and maintain their dignity. These storytellers are capable of producing incredible results, such as being able to mediate conflicts between farmers and cattle herders in the border region between Mali and Guinea. And even more recently, the March 2013 Malian coup d'etat. Although storytellers have been very effective at defusing conflict, they have been weakened by outside interference. Dialogue forums can also be used to coordinate disaster relief efforts. These forums will become a familiar gathering place for the local populations to ask for and give the requested aid needed for them to recover from shocks and stressors. The idea is that unaffected communities can assist those communities that have been met with disaster and help them recover, adapt, and improve from their degraded state. These dialogue forums can be switched from resolving interpersonal disputes to also serving as an institutional memory for preserving certain techniques that have proven useful in recovering from a disaster. In order for meaningful community organization and community building through dialogue to take place, the different levels of government in the countries that are being targeted for improved good governance and resilience programming need to, at the very least, not interfere with the local level initiatives for good governance and resilience initiatives. An example of a negative interference by government is the weakening of these traditional Malian storytellers, which would otherwise continue to have a significant impact in dialogue creation. If the different levels of government wish to be included and involved in good governance and resilience initiatives, then they must make a positive good faith effort to assist and provide their many localities with access to the required agencies and resources.
To conclude, we would like to once again note that women empowerment, community organization, and community building through dialogue have been the key concepts that we have gathered from the literature on linking resilience and good governance at the individual level. Through these three areas of research, we have concluded that citizen engagement, participation, and dispute resolution have stood out as the main goals of good governance at the individual level. Timothy Frankenberger explains that once citizens are engaged and participating, they can make better use of the bonding, bridging, and linking social capital available to them, also noted in this portion of the graph. Critical concepts, for example, for women to be able to have access to the market, to sell and purchase products. With regards to the social capital levels noted by Daniel Aldrich, right here, important components that we find at the individual level begin with good governance at the bonding level, including school-based programs, community building, dialogue forums, as well as women-led village savings and loan associations.
At the bridging level, we find it is important to have communal activities in place, such as peace communities and empowered storytellers. Bauman explains that non-conflict forming discussions between farmers and cattle herders create better relationships among individuals and households. Timothy Frankenberger explains that these infrastructures will allow for goods exchange and market accessibility that can be accessed once a community gets hit with a climate stress. Frankenberger also notes that at the linking level, we find that awareness of non-government organizations and formal government agencies providing access to education and healthcare is a critical step to connect the individual and the household to the larger community level of governance.
I'm Bruce Gilley, Associate Professor of Political Science at Portland State, and I'm here again to conclude this presentation. The presentation has examined the linkages between good governance and resilience at the national, community, and individual or household levels. By necessity, our literature review and our presentation has left out several factors that could be mentioned and focused instead on the dominant themes linking resilience and good governance. Our attention has been given to the question of how state and societal actors can restructure and reorganize their governance systems in order to enhance resilience in the face of increasingly severe natural and man-made shocks and stresses. We have centered the discussion on the critical role of social capital in making governance systems at all three systems work better, including for the purposes of resilience. We've also paid particular attention to the role of both formal and informal institutions, noting the ways in which the latter are often more important in the contexts that we describe here. Finally, we've highlighted the inextricable link at all levels of governance between achieving resilience and achieving socioeconomic development. Just as we note how resilience is almost always found in the presence of good governance, so too resilience is almost always found in the presence of widespread and equitable development opportunities for all members of society. We hope that this presentation and the literature review on which it is based is useful not just for our clients at Mercy Corps, but also for all actors involved in promoting resilience and good governance, both in developing countries and in high-income countries. I'd like to thank the members of our task force for their excellent work this quarter. You can find the literature review as well as the visual graphic we have produced to summarize it at the Portland State University Political Science Department section on the website under Undergraduate Opportunities. And we look forward to continuing the conversation with you in the future. Thank you.